I remember the first time I realized my aunt didn't see me as family. I was 10, sitting at the edge of her grand mahogany dining table while she poured tea with painstaking precision, and she didn't even glance at me when I tried to join the conversation. My mother had passed away when I was 6, and from that moment on, I'd hoped Aunt Miranda would fill the void, but she never did. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that reassured everyone else but left me cold, like a pane of glass separating us. I learned early that affection from her had conditions, invisible lines I could never cross, boundaries I wasn't even allowed to question. Years passed, and I became a quiet observer in her world. Her house was immaculate, every vase perfectly aligned, every book in order. She had a reputation in town as the perfect aunt, the one who always hosted extravagant garden parties and sponsored charity events. But behind closed doors, she was a different woman. She spoke to me in clipped sentences, never bothering to hide her irritation when I asked for help with school projects or when I tried to share small victories. I became invisible in her eyes, an awkward shadow she tolerated only because she had to. High school was worse. I tried to cling to the remnants of family hope. I would bring my art projects over, hoping to see her smile, to hear her praise. Instead, she would critique harshly. "You need discipline, not imagination," she said once, as if I were a project to be fixed rather than a niece to be cherished. I stopped showing her anything, but I never stopped watching her. I saw the way she flattered her friends, the way her laugh drew people in, and how effortlessly she manipulated them into thinking she was flawless. I understood then that she thrived on admiration, not love. College offered a temporary escape. I moved to another city, found roommates who treated me like a sister, professors who actually saw my potential, and friends who cheered when I succeeded. I flourished in the absence of her judgment, but even miles away, her shadow lingered in my life like an unfinished sentence. I received letters from her, always perfunctory, always wrapped in that same polite coldness. She asked about my grades, my health, my minor accomplishments, but never about how I felt, about my loneliness, about the nights I stayed awake thinking of my mother. I wrote back sparingly, my words neutral, careful. She had no right to my warmth after years of neglect, and I guarded it like armor. Then the call came. I had been at a cafe in the city, reviewing my notes for an important presentation when my phone rang. Her voice trembled on the other end. I need you, Clara." I froze, a strange knot forming in my stomach. Her husband had fallen gravely ill, something sudden and severe, and she was asking me to come back. The audacity of her timing made my blood boil. After all the years of silent disregard, she wanted my care now. I felt anger, disbelief, and a cold, calculating curiosity. Was this the moment I had been unconsciously waiting for, the chance to finally assert the dignity she never gave me? I packed immediately, the journey home feeling both surreal and tense. Driving through the familiar streets, I noticed the old cracks in the pavement, the towering trees I used to climb, the houses where I had once felt invisible. By the time I pulled up to her driveway, I realized I had transformed, hardened in ways I didn't fully recognize. She opened the door, frail and desperate. Her perfectly styled hair looked messy, her hands trembled as she reached for me. "Clara, please. You're my only family who can help me now," she whispered, eyes glistening with tears. I stepped inside, the weight of every memory pressing down on me. She guided me to the sitting room where her husband lay pale and shivering, and I saw the gravity of the situation. I could feel her panic, the stark contrast between this vulnerability and the cold woman who had dismissed me for so many years. But I didn't rush to help. I observed quietly, mentally cataloging every way she had wronged me, every small cruelty, every invisible slap she had delivered with her words and gestures. Over the next few days, I became indispensable. I cooked, I cleaned, I managed appointments, insurance, doctors, medication. She clung to me, offering fragile smiles, touching my arm as if to claim the bond she had denied for years. Each time she did, I felt a surge of controlled fury. I played the part of the dutiful niece, the family savior, but inside, I was meticulous in my thoughts. I didn't speak of the past. I didn't confront her. I watched her unravel, relied on her dependence, and learned the rhythms of her desperation. Late at night, when the house was silent, I would sit in the dim light of the kitchen, reflecting. Her husband's illness was grave but stable, and she was becoming increasingly frantic. I noticed the small changes, how she flinched when I didn't immediately respond, how she began asking questions I had never answered before. Questions about my life, my achievements, my choices. I realized she was trying to rebuild the bridge she had burned, and I knew I could walk across it on my terms or let it collapse entirely. The thought thrilled me. I began leaving subtle reminders of my presence and importance. I organized her husband's medications, labeled files with precision, even corrected errors in appointments she had made in panic. Each act reinforced her dependence on me. I could see it in her eyes. She needed me more than she had ever pretended to, and she would have to face the consequences of neglecting me. I kept my tone calm, my voice soothing, my expressions neutral. I was the perfect niece now, one who demanded nothing, yet held the power entirely. It was during one of those late nights while preparing her husband's breakfast tray that she touched my hand in genuine gratitude and whispered, "I don't know what I would do without you, Clara." I felt a shiver run through me, not of warmth, but of a dark satisfaction. She had finally admitted my importance, but it was too late for simple affection. I had collected every slight, every insult, every moment she acted as though I didn't exist, and I was now in a position to orchestrate my own justice. Not through confrontation, not through violence, but through careful, deliberate reclamation of what she had denied me: respect, acknowledgement, and control. Her dependence became my instrument. Every time she asked for advice, every time she deferred to me, every time she hesitated because she couldn't make a decision without my input, I felt a quiet victory. I could see the panic behind her composed facade when I suggested changes she hadn't thought of. I could see her adjusting to my authority, however small, and it thrilled me more than I expected. The realization came slowly but vividly. I had the power to make her reckon with the years she had spent erasing me, and I intended to do it with patience, precision, and a cruelty of justice that only someone who had been invisible for too long could wield. I woke the next morning to the sound of muted arguing. My aunt's voice, sharp and frayed, echoed down the hall, followed by the low murmur of the visiting nurse she'd hired out of desperation. I stood outside the doorway, unseen, listening as Miranda insisted she could manage everything without help, that she had family now. The nurse replied with professional firmness that her husband's condition required consistent monitoring, and I heard the unmistakable tremor in my aunt's voice when she said, "Clara is handling it." She said my name like it was both a shield and a confession. I let the conversation play out a moment longer before stepping into the room, making sure they noticed how calmly I moved, how composed I remained despite the underlying chaos. Her relief when she saw me bordered on desperate devotion. I took over the morning routine with practiced efficiency, and the nurse nodded approvingly. "You're doing an exceptional job," she told me quietly while recording vitals. My aunt's gaze flickered between us and something in her expression tightened. Not jealousy, exactly, but a dawning realization that the power dynamic of her household had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't the flawless orchestrator of her world. I was. Throughout the day, she hovered. Every time I adjusted a blanket or prepared a new meal, she watched with an intensity that felt both anxious and remorseful. I waited for her to speak, for her to apologize, for her to confront the past. But she remained silent, perhaps too afraid that acknowledging what she'd done would shatter the fragile balance we were maintaining. I found that silence useful. It gave me space to maneuver. Later that afternoon, while her husband slept, she approached me in the kitchen. Her hands twisted a dish towel, her posture small in a way I'd never seen. "You're so capable," she murmured, eyes downcast. I should have said that long ago. I kept slicing vegetables, not looking at her. I managed. "I see that now." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I glimpsed the woman she could have been if she'd chosen differently. "I wasn't there for you after your mother died. I should have been, but I didn't know how." I paused mid-slice, the knife resting on the cutting board. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and grief. "You didn't try." She flinched, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she whispered, "Please let me make things right." The words, while genuine, didn't wash away years of neglect, but I let her believe they had planted a seed. I nodded once and resumed cooking, allowing her the illusion of progress. The truth was, I didn't want her apology to absolve her. I wanted it to expose her vulnerability, to remind her that I held something she couldn't navigate alone, her own need for redemption. As days passed, her dependence on me deepened. Doctors called me instead of her. Insurance agents directed their questions to me. Her husband asked for me by name when he was in pain, trusting my steadiness more than her panicked flutter. Every moment reinforced the shift. She began consulting me on household matters she once guarded fiercely: finances, schedules, even simple decisions like what to cook for dinner. She didn't seem to realize how fully she'd ceded control. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of appointments, she invited me to sit with her in the living room. The lights were dim and she looked older, diminished, as though years had rushed at her all at once. "I want you to stay longer," she said softly. "Not just for him. For me." I studied her carefully. "You want me here because you're afraid to be alone." Her eyes filled. "Is that so wrong?" "It's honest," I replied, and it was the first honest thing she had said to me in years. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back gently, rising from the chair. "I'll be here as long as I'm needed," I told her, letting the ambiguity hang between us. She didn't realize that my definition of needed and hers were entirely different things. My plan began to crystallize the next morning when I entered her home office. She had left the door ajar, likely from exhaustion, and stacks of financial paperwork covered the desk. Bills, overdue notices, investment portfolios, all meticulously organized but undeniably strained. I skimmed enough to understand one crucial truth. She was in far deeper trouble than she had let on. Their savings were dwindling under the weight of medical expenses. Her husband's business, which she believed would recover once he regained his strength, had already collapsed in her absence. She'd been too busy curating her social image to notice the slow decline. And now, staring at the numbers, I realized she was close to losing everything. A slow, steady calm spread through me. She had spent my childhood reminding me that I was the one who needed her. Now, in the cruel symmetry of life, she needed me in ways she hadn't anticipated. Financially, emotionally, logistically, I had become the axis her world spun around. When she entered the office and saw me standing there, her breath caught. She looked at the papers, then at me, shame flooding her features. "I didn't want you to see this," she whispered. "I figured as much," I said evenly. "How long has it been like this?" "Months," she admitted, sinking into the chair. "I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed." Anyone. As if I were still in that category, an outsider. "Why didn't you ask for help earlier?" I asked, folding my arms. She hesitated, then spoke with quiet honesty. "Because I didn't think you would care." There it was, the truth, blunt and unvarnished. She had believed her past treatment of me had burned every bridge, and she wasn't wrong. But the admission struck something deep inside me. A flicker of the child I used to be, the one who had cried silently in the guest bedroom while she hosted dinner parties downstairs. I exhaled slowly. "I might be able to help," I said, watching her eyes widen with hope, "but not in the way you expect." She leaned forward. "Anything, Clara. Tell me what to do." I didn't answer immediately. I let the weight of her desperation settle in the room, heavy and unmistakable. Behind her, the evening sun cast long shadows across the floor, and for a moment, the house felt suspended in time, balanced between the past she had crafted and the future I would design. My revenge wouldn't be explosive. It wouldn't be cruel for cruelty's sake. It would be precise, measured, the kind of reckoning that forced her to look directly at the consequences of the silence she'd shown me. I would help her rebuild, but only in a way that allowed me to reclaim every inch of dignity she had denied me. She wouldn't see the trap, not at first. She would simply feel herself slipping into a new arrangement where I, not she, held the authority. I stepped closer, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Let's start by going through everything," I said, gesturing to the papers. "If I'm going to help, I need the complete truth." She nodded eagerly, relief washing over her. She didn't yet understand that honesty was the first step toward surrender, and for the first time in my life, she was the one standing at the threshold of uncertainty while I held the door open. The more time I spent in Aunt Miranda's house, the more the dynamic shifted. She began consulting me on every minor detail, from which brand of nutritional supplements to buy for her husband, to the color of the curtains in the living room that would make him feel calmer. Each question, each pause before making a decision, was a reminder of how thoroughly she had come to depend on me. I remained calm, polite, almost tender, but inside, I was mapping my strategy. I had no desire to hurt her physically. This was a game of intellect and patience. But every word I spoke, every suggestion I made subtly reminded her that she had once treated me like I was disposable. One afternoon, she asked me to help reorganize her finances. I don't understand all of this anymore," she admitted, her voice unsteady, a vulnerability I had never heard from her before. I sat beside her, reviewing statements and bills, guiding her through the complex world of investments and accounts she had always flaunted to others as a mark of sophistication. But while I guided, I also began planting seeds, Subtle nudges that suggested caution, small changes that would later put her in situations where she had to acknowledge my competence and judgment. Each correction was a reminder of her oversight, a silent acknowledgement of my intelligence. Her husband's health began to stabilize, though he remained frail. As she grew more reliant on me, I noticed her demeanor shifting in ways that were almost comical if they hadn't been so infuriating for years. She started mimicking my phrases, asking my opinion about things she would have once dismissed, and even laughed at jokes she wouldn't have found amusing before. It was like watching a delicate flower bloom, but in her case, the bloom was a realization that I was indispensable, and I relished it. One evening, as I helped her husband settle into bed, she lingered by the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. "Clara, I feel like I've failed you," she said, her voice trembling. My chest tightened. This was the moment I had anticipated. I didn't speak immediately, I simply looked at her, letting the silence stretch. She swallowed hard. "I never treated you like family, and I don't know if I can make it right." I let out a soft sigh, gentle, yet commanding. "You can start by acknowledging that I'm here, that I matter," I said. My tone was calm, almost motherly, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. She nodded, tears brimming, and for a moment, I allowed myself a flicker of satisfaction. Finally, she was seeing me, truly seeing me, after years of erasure. Over the next few weeks, I slowly expanded my influence in subtle, intricate ways. I began taking control of the household schedules, subtly guiding her social interactions, and even offering suggestions on community engagements that would improve her public image. Every step, every adjustment was a careful assertion of my authority, a demonstration that I was capable and valuable, that she had been blind to the person I had grown into. She didn't resist. She barely questioned. The humiliation of her previous neglect played out in quiet, private victories for me, each more satisfying than the last. But then, the unexpected happened. A distant cousin who had always idolized Aunt Miranda came to town. He arrived with the same deference and reverence she had once demanded from me. I watched as she fawned over him, entertained his stories, hung on his words with a desperate attentiveness I had never received. My heart twisted in rage and old pain, and I realized that while I had taken control in the household, the wider world still validated her superiority over me. I couldn't allow that. Not now. Not ever. I decided to confront her in the only way that would truly matter. One evening, after dinner, I invited her to sit with me in the study, away from prying eyes and ears. I spoke slowly, carefully, my words deliberate. "Do you remember how you treated me when I was a child, when I needed you?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with all the hurt I had buried for years. She flinched, the color draining from her face. You didn't see me," I interrupted, my voice firmer now, sharpened by years of suppressed resentment. "You ignored me, dismissed me, acted as if I didn't exist. And now, after all this time, you need me." Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but I continued. "Do you see the irony? That the one you treated as invisible is the one who saved you and your husband? That the person you overlooked is the one who now decides how your life runs?" Tears streamed down her face. I don't know what to say," she whispered. I didn't want an apology. I wanted acknowledgement, recognition, and power reclaimed in the quietest, most devastating way possible. And she gave it to me. By admitting her dependence, by trembling before me, by finally seeing me as essential, she gave me the revenge that no one else could, the validation of my worth on my terms. The days that followed were a delicate dance. She relied on me for everything, but I never let her forget the price of neglect. Every decision she deferred to me, every grateful glance, every whispered "thank you" was a reminder of her past failures. I was no longer the invisible child, no longer the ignored niece. I was the orchestrator of the household, the keeper of her fragile dignity, the quiet force she had wronged and now could not live without. Yet I wasn't cruel beyond reason. I allowed her moments of pride, small victories where she felt competent, but always in ways that required her to acknowledge my presence, my guidance, my indispensability. It was a balance, a careful choreography of power and subtle retribution, and I savored it. I had turned years of pain into an unassailable strength, a quiet dominion she could not contest. I realized then that revenge need not be violent or humiliating. Sometimes the most exquisite justice comes in the form of recognition, dependence, and authority reclaimed. Aunt Miranda had demanded loyalty, warmth, and care that she had never given me. Now she had all of that, filtered through the lens of my control, and every day I reminded her that love and family were not entitlements. They were earned. And in that quiet, tense, beautiful dominance, I finally felt the satisfaction that had eluded me for so long. I had survived her disregard, grown stronger because of it, and turned her need into a mirror reflecting the years she had tried to erase. I was no longer the overlooked niece. I was Clara, the one she could not do without. The one who had rewritten the rules of family, power, and respect in our household with patience, precision, and an unyielding heart.